Tom, thank you so much for being on the show with us again. Remind everybody who you are and what you do.
My name is Tom Eston. I'm my day job. I am the VP of consulting at Bishop Fox, which is an offensive security consulting firm. But my side job, if you will, is I'm the podcast host of the Shared Security podcast. I've been doing that for over 14 years now. This year will be 15, the big 1-5. So it's been an adventure. But besides that, I'm also really into cybersecurity, into privacy. I've done a lot of research in the past on that, and yeah, it's just one of my passions.
Very cool. And by the way, the last time you were on the show, you had your co-host with you, and we had a circus of a time recording that episode and having a good time with that. And that is the first and only time so far I've had 3 guests on a show. So you
Oh
guys should
wow!
feel, yeah,
Very
yeah,
honored. Very
yeah,
honored.
feel honored for that. But yeah, that was a lot of fun. And I think this is maybe our maybe 4th time
Yeah.
have you been on the show? Because
Yep.
I listen to your show every week, and so I appreciate what you guys were saying. When I first started listening to the show, I was like, I'm not quite sure what they're talking about or what they're doing. But now, after listening to you guys, probably pushing 2-3 years now, it's
Yeah.
like, oh, I totally understand what they're doing, and I'm not even in this field. So if you guys can make somebody like me understand what's going on, you're doing a good job.
Well, the feeling is mutual because I listen to your podcast every week as well, and have done that for a long time. I think probably the same time we've been listening to each other, and yeah, I learn a lot from you as well because especially more on the physical security and the home
Mhm.
security side, that has been very valuable for me, and I've told friends and family to listen to your podcast as well. So you've gained more listeners over the years for sure.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and it's been fun to see how podcasting has grown and what it's become today, and hopefully where it's going to kind of go here in the future.
Agreed.
Yeah. All right. So today, what I want to talk to you about is a really complicated subject that affects, I think, everybody listening to this show. And we're going to talk about like social engineering and data collection that happens online. So to kind of get us going here, what's your definition of social engineering, and what are a few examples that we may see?
Yeah, social engineering, like you said, is a pretty complex topic, but it really comes down to a very basic thing, which is it's the act of getting somebody to do something that they wouldn't necessarily do on their own. And what's interesting about social engineering is it kind of goes beyond like a typical con, right? Like that
Right.
we all know and love, right? From the different types of con men and other things you see in movies and TV and things. And of course, this happens in real life, but it's beyond that because they're usually a lot more sophisticated in their nature. And what makes them sophisticated oftentimes is this thing called pretexting. And a pretext is basically a scenario that is created, and it's usually kind of borders the line of trust and
Mm-hmm.
validate or invalidating somebody's trust that they have in another person, in another individual. But often in the realm of cybersecurity and the world that I live in, we will develop these pretexts for our clients to simulate threats that these
Hmm.
organizations have. But for the average individual, the normal person that may not be in cybersecurity, this happens to them. They can become victims of a social engineering attack through a pretext that is being used by an attacker, and oftentimes it's not just an individual that's being targeted, but it is a large group of people being targeted, say like an entire social network
Right.
can be targeted by a social engineer. Literally one person can do that.
Right. Right. And we'll get into that in a minute here. But I think what I heard you say a minute ago was like you could be a victim of social engineering, but it doesn't mean that necessarily a crime has been committed against you. It's your opinion was changed, or you
Yes.
decided to like something that you normally don't like, that sort of thing, right?
Exactly. A lot of people like to compare it to the used car salesman, right? When you go to buy a car and they're going to use different techniques on you. And the reason they do these techniques is because they are time tested. They are a pretext, right? They know how, when somebody wants to buy a car, they know the exact kind of, as soon as you walk in the door, they know pretty much everything about you. They're profiling you. They know your age. They know you're a male, you're a female. They've seen this so many times. So they essentially go through this pretext of, well, and it's not malicious, right? Like
Right.
they're
Yeah.
just going to tell you, like, hey, what kind of car are you looking for? Well, let me show you this. And then they use techniques to maybe change your mind into, I really wasn't thinking about that car, but after you said that, that's actually kind of interesting. Let me tell me more about that. And they get you to ask a lot of questions. There's a lot of those kind of techniques. So some people may say, well, look, I'm getting manipulated by the used car salesman here. But at the end of the day, you're probably going to buy the car.
Hmm.
If you like the car, you felt you got a good deal on the car,
Right.
then that in a way is kind of, you were social engineered in a good way to get something that you wanted.
Right.
But they
Right.
wanted as well, which was getting the sale.
Right. Exactly. So you hinted at this a second ago. In your opinion, how has social media played a role in social engineering and like swaying public opinion?
Yeah, that is a huge topic and a big concern these days, especially with how quickly news headlines and things go viral on social. I hear from all the time from people that we often just read the headline and we
Hmm.
don't actually read the article, right? We'll
Right.
instantly just hit retweet or we'll share because some headline is social engineering us through like clickbaity
Yep.
type headline that hits our emotions. And
Hmm.
and that's the other thing about a good social engineering attack is that it's going to hit you emotionally, right? There's going to be some emotional trigger that's going to get you to take an action. And that is what the attacker wants you to do. So that may be clicking a link because maybe there is a malicious ad, or maybe there
Mm.
is a phishing form that is going to solicit you for information about yourself, about your credit cards, your social security number, all those things. And it's usually not upfront either. It's
Mhm.
usually a headline or it's usually a link that looks enticing, right? To
Right.
click because it generates some, oh, that's interesting. You click on it. Oh, that's even more interesting. And then you start going down this rabbit hole and the attacker has got you, right? They
Yeah.
have hooked you at that point, and that's another way of them, gaining that information about you. It's also interesting to see how willingly that we share information about
Mhm.
ourselves.
Mhm.
So, my co-host Kevin Johnson, a long time ago, did a little experiment where we posted on Facebook. This is back in like 2012 when
Uh-huh.
Facebook was still very new,
Right.
and it was a 25 random things about you
Yes.
questionnaire. And we
Uh-huh.
still see these today. There was another one just a couple weeks ago that I talked about on my podcast called "Get to Know Me."
Right.
Right?
Right. Yep.
And these things are not malicious by, their intent is not malicious. It's somebody that wants to, you wanna know more about your friends, right? And you
Mhm.
find these little tidbits of like, "Oh, I didn't know that about you. I didn't know that about you." Well, what we did was we actually took the password reset questions from Yahoo at the time and posted on Facebook to groups of information security professionals. And we actually got people in security, you would think that would know better,
Oh, goodness.
actually filling these out. And of course, at Facebook, when they had very limited privacy controls back then, not like they do today, this information became public information. And that is the type of information that an attacker is going to look for in mass, right?
Yeah.
Not just you individually, because you're probably not targeted unless you're some famous person, right?
Right.
But in general, they're going to gather all this information and now they know your password reset questions or private sensitive information about you that they can use in a pretext. And
Mhm.
we still see this today where people get random messages through Facebook Messenger or Instagram, and then they will pretend to be this long lost friend, this family member. They'll actually impersonate often somebody that this person trusts or knows, or is already connected with, and some of them get pretty elaborate.
Mhm.
And we see this with romance scams. We see this with all these other types of scams that are out there, but that is social engineering. And it is based a lot of times off of information that you post publicly that the
Right.
attacker is using against you.
Yeah. I remember, kind of learning about these things, and I'm pretty sure I did the whole 25 questions about me thing, all those years ago. Yeah, and so, I don't know, all that stuff's floating out there. I guess Kevin Johnson can go get it and get into my accounts now. But, you know, I I started think or started learning about, hey, if a link doesn't look right, that's a sign, or if it's in broken English, that's a sign. But now AI has kind of entered the chat here, and that's making things more difficult to detect for us, right?
It is in a lot of cases, yes, because ChatGPT or whatever LLM of the day that an attacker can use, literally they can have it, create pretext scenarios for you, or they can have it create, full on, here's the right language to use because you can say, I'm a native Russian speaker, but I want this to be in English that sounds more convincing to an actual, someone that speaks English natively. So they are now very finely, with a lot of detail, creating these pretexts now. So they're getting indistinguishable. And some of those old tricks that we know about phishing URLs and about broken English, like those don't always apply anymore because
Right.
I have seen ones that are very extremely convincing that would fool even the most savvy, security aware person. And so you have to be extra cautious these days because of the world of AI, and not just in the online world, but we have seen that transcend now into into phone calls,
Mm.
where deepfakes come into play now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And deepfakes are getting more sophisticated by the day. The audio and the video technology, that is able to be used sometimes extremely affordably. There's a lot of free sites that you can use these tools, and then the ones you pay for are even better. And it gets scary for me to think of like a nation state as an example who has
Yep.
unlimited money, unlimited funds, unlike all of us, right?
Right.
What they are going to be able to do. And it definitely gets me more nervous as we approach the November elections here in the U.S. because we're going to be. I tell people to buckle up because there's going to be a lot of that as we get closer to November. Unfortunately.
Yeah, man, it would just be a really bad scenario if there was a government that had a lot of hacking abilities and a backdoor into a major social media network.
Hmm.
Man, that would be really bad, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that would be bad.
Oh gosh, let's hope that doesn't happen. Uh, so I feel like as Americans, we kind of have, some of us at least have a very healthy distrust of the media, what we're seeing on social media, those sorts of things. Do you think as humans, as Americans, that we're ever going to be able to trust the media and social media again, or what? Like, where do we go from here?
Wow, that's a great question. It's really, really hard, because unfortunately, everything is so politicized, in social media, in the major media, not so major media. It feels like you can't really go anywhere without things being manipulated, or you feel things are being manipulated for some agenda. Somebody's got an agenda somewhere. And honestly, I've been telling people like just turn the news off. Like
Yeah.
it's go do something else that's more productive because we are constantly being manipulated by this information, and it's harder and harder to fact check things because even when
Mm,
you do fact check, sometimes the fact checkers are not fact checking correctly. And
right.
it's like, I can't even believe the fact checkers. So we've become, I think, a society where now we have to figure things out on our own and make the best decisions that we can based on the information that is provided. But I tell people like you have to question everything. Everything you're reading, everything you're seeing, even if it's from a source that you trust, because and maybe it's just my hacker mindset, but we've seen how the trusted news sources can be manipulated and they can be hacked as well. And
Yeah.
that's where the real danger comes in of, a major news organization gets hacked or gets manipulated in a way where headlines go out. I mean, we've seen lots of cases of this already of like, you know, aliens invading and, everyone's freaking out and like, oh no, that was, somebody hacked our website or somebody hacked our Instagram or
Mhm, mhm.
whatever. And we've seen a lot of these account takeovers happening on social media. I really worry more about that, where, we just seen what was the FIC or in the United States got the
Yeah.
Bitcoin hacked.
Yes,
And
yes.
we're talking about federal agencies.
Mhm.
Now we're talking beyond the media, right? But all the
Right.
federal agencies have Twitter accounts, and if they're not properly securing those, imagine the scenario where, and we've seen this before too. I think Trump's account got hacked,
Mhm,
Obama's. I think all these,
mhm.
like,
But they
the
all get hacked.
president is tweeting something out, and what happens if they can't regain control of that fast enough? And information starts spreading, disinformation, misinformation. I worry more about that. And sooner or later, I'm waiting for, I think it's something like out of Mr. Robot, if you've ever seen that TV show where everybody's TVs all of a sudden shows, anonymous or,
Yeah. Yeah.
like some on mass broadcast where it looks like everybody has been hacked because of, major media has been compromised. But I can't predict what's going to happen in the future, but I am really worried with the way that we've implemented AI and the advancements in deepfake technology. These things are going to get harder and harder. It's just like today where we can't really distinguish between an AI generated news article and one written by a human. There
Mhm.
is, of course, technology that's being developed to, identify those things. I think about like schools right now, what they're
Yeah.
going through
Yeah.
with, you know, s- you know, kids are using ChatGPT to write their essays, and there's actually school districts now using technology to identify and flag what they consider ChatGPT created essays, but what I've seen is there's huge rates of false positive.
Mhm.
And I actually talked to one parent in particular, a friend of mine, whose kid was accused of plagiarism and using ChatGPT, and he literally did not, but the software that the school district was using said he was.
Mhm.
So now it becomes the parents have to defend their kids against this technology that's actually has a good purpose, I guess, is to, make sure nobody's cheating, but it's accusing people because the tech still is not there yet. This is all new. I mean, AI really just started like coming out of its infancy at like just the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's gotten
That's it.
crazy. Yeah, I remember sitting in, I guess, like, one of my freshman English classes, and the professor's at the front of the room, and she's like, "Oh, and by the way, if you're thinking of plagiarizing, your paper, I have this new tool, it's called Google. I'm just gonna copy your work and
Uh-huh.
paste it into
Yeah.
Google and see if it pops up somewhere." And I thought, "Oh," because like, I had never, like, thought to, like, copy and paste somebody else's
Yeah.
work and put it into mine. And then I did a show, of, like, Chat GPT versus the Secure Dad for home security advice,
Mhm.
and what it spit out wasn't wrong, it
Mhm.
wasn't bad, it was just, this isn't the most relevant stuff because it's not living in the real world, it doesn't
Right.
actually have a house, it doesn't know how to do these sorts of things, but soon enough, we'll get there, I
Yeah.
guess, and considering how much, OpenAI and all these other, companies are crawling articles like I write, like the stuff that I write is getting crawled by these things and becoming smarter off of my work and your work as well.
Mhm.
Like, it's, before too long, it's gonna be really hard to tell what isn't and what is real. Just today, I was looking through Instagram and somebody had posted, a video of a lady sitting in her car. She had like a nose ring, dressed like the typical suburban mom kind of thing. And she was just talking about this product that she really liked. And if you read the caption, it's like, she's not real. And
Yeah.
it was just
Yeah.
in passing. it was good enough to fool me. But you could see there was like a lot of repeats here and there's little
Yes.
quick jumps here, but it really took watching it and completely giving it my focus for about 30 seconds to see, oh, wait, this really isn't real.
Yeah, and that's really all it takes, right? The tech honestly doesn't have to be perfect right
Right.
now
Yeah.
to social engineer you to click a link or to submit information or to spread it virally across all of your friends. And that's part of that manipulation of a good social engineering attack. And I think people have figured that out with AI, right? There's so many inconsistencies with the AI photos and the AI videos. Like we all laugh about that with like somebody having, 50 fingers and, things all like weird and goofy. But at the end of the day, like, does it even have to go to that detail? Like somebody will probably
Right.
convinced because they looked at a face and you're like, oh, that's got to be a real person. Don't actually see all the details that are wrong unless you actually spend time looking at it. But
Mhm.
that's in a lot of good social engineering attacks, that's what I've seen is like things are very quick. Things move very
Mhm.
fast because they want to limit the amount of time that you have to think. Because as soon as you start thinking and questioning, that's not a good attack for them, right? And
Right.
that's why you'll see the sense of urgency is often a big part of most pretexts is because, you hear about the situations where these deep fake phone calls where someone is pretending to be your family member and they say, "Hey, this is your son. He's in a car accident and it sounds like your kid." And of course, the first thing you do is like you want to help your kid, right? Like
Right.
an urgent situation. I need you to wire me money because I'm in a hospital or whatever. And I've been telling people that it's a good idea these days to have a safe word with your
Yeah.
family
Yeah.
members. I think you've talked about this on your show as well, as that extra layer. And I hate doing that, right? Like, as if my kid really called me an emergency, 9 out of 10 times, I'm probably going to know that okay, it is an emergency because there's certain things I know about my kid when my kid calls me. But I think for most people, though, we're going to get to this point where we're going to have to like question even phone calls from our family because the tech is gonna get so good.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I think part of what makes a pretext so good is that they have like real legitimate information, stuff that is like close enough, or even
Yeah,
information about me that's, legitimate, kind of like we were talking
yeah.
about with the whole phishing thing with the 25 questions. So give me an example of like the data that's being collected on us every day. What's something that typically gets collected on me when I go online or when I go on social media?
Yeah, there's kind of the passive things, and then there's the things that we kind of freely give. So, like, the passive things are stuff like your IP address, the type of browser you're using, whether you're on a mobile phone or you're on a desktop. Your location is often part of that information as well. If you log into like a social media site or some other site with a username, an email address, I mean, there's all these kind of things that we passively do, and sometimes that we don't even know that our computers are just naturally giving out. That's part of like data and data collection by companies and websites and things. And then there's the things that we freely give, right? Like status updates about, hey, I'm on vacation and I'm here, in Cancun or wherever. And we just kind of give this information out because we think that's, well, only my friends are seeing it or my small network. And we often forget that, I always tell people like, even in a private closed group, on Facebook, like that information can be screenshotted. It can make its way outside of that small circle
Mhm.
you think. You'd really be surprised how quickly that things can be shared on social media, even outside of our own control. So, it really becomes even when you're going and, buying a product online, we talk a lot about the email address. That email address can be correlated and it can be sold to data
Oh,
brokers
yeah.
and spread across. And you're just thinking, this is just an email address. What could an email address really tell anybody about me? It doesn't even have my name in it. It's just some weird, thing I had when I was a teenager, a nickname, right? But that nickname in that email address you'd be surprised how much that can reveal about you because you've probably inadvertently posted that somewhere publicly that could potentially be, linked to your IP address, where your IP address could be linked back to your location. And all of this can be, I mean, there's companies out there, as you know, Andy, that collect this information and resell it. Zoom Info and all these other sites that are out there, very easy to like pay $10 and find out really as much information you want about anybody.
Yeah.
That becomes, they call it public information. But a lot of that is information that you're just freely, you gave away at some point on the internet, even if it was years ago, is going to eventually be correlated back to you.
Right. And you talk about the email address. Like you could just take that email address and go to like Amazon, plug it in and try one of, I don't know, 50 generic passwords and it might work. It might open up that account, or you might be able to send a password reset or something like that. Like just your email address being out there really can be a big deal. So I'm glad
Yeah.
you brought that up. So as a red teamer, you have well, first of all, my first part of my question is explain to us what a red teamer is, but then give us a story or a scenario that you did where you collected data on someone that really helped sell your mission.
Yeah, so a red teamer in the world of cybersecurity. So a red team is essentially a very orchestrated, penetration test that is actually going after scenarios, right? So we create a scenario for an organization, which may include network attacks, attacks on their websites, their external infrastructure, but it could also include their physical buildings. It could include the people within the organization. So we could be doing social engineering type of simulations and attacks. But it's really meant, a red team is really meant for a mature organization that has a very well established security program that wants to test their defenses against very scenario based attacks. So one of those might be a ransomware attack on a large, let's just say a Fortune 500 financial institution, right? Someone that already has a very mature program, but wants to see how would they respond to, say, a nation state type of adversary that is going after the organization. And so with a red team engagement, there's a lot of different skills that are required by being a red teamer. So you kind of have to be good at all of those things in a way, or have specialists on the team that perform. So, for example, like at Bishop Fox, we have someone that's very good at social engineering, probably I say one of the best social engineers in the world, I would say. And she can just literally call somebody and probably get all the information about your life by making a phone call. But um, those specialties really allow those pretexts to kind of take place. And I remember one instance where we were asked by a large organization to target their C-level executives. And one of the things that we did was we went to LinkedIn. And LinkedIn has all kinds of information about companies. And it's actually really shocking that people and organizations give out entire org structures on LinkedIn showing, I mean, you can look up everything. You can look at past, meetings, and you can see PowerPoint presentations of, executive discussions, and they actually have the org chart. So we did find an org chart for the org, matched them up to LinkedIn, put together kind of the profile of a more of an advanced phishing attack that we're going to do against the executive team, and had about 10 executives that we targeted. Once we had LinkedIn to gather information about who they were, what their positions are, how long they've been with the company, looked at what they were posting. What I find fascinating about LinkedIn is it's transcended kind of the corporate, businessy talk, and people post a lot of personal information
Hmm.
now
Mhm.
about, hey, here's the great vacation I had with my wife and kids, or, hey, I really feel very strongly about this charity or this political affiliation I have, or all these things. And so you start to learn about who a person is, what their family is like, where they're from. And then you can, of course, start using search engines and start digging a little bit deeper, see what social networks they're on. And you start creating this pretext of, okay, how am I going to, because the goal was to actually compromise some of the executives' corporate laptops. Like we wanted
Mhm.
to gain
Okay.
access to their laptops because that would be our jumping points to gain access to the rest of the organization's network. And so we crafted these scenarios of basically, the execs kind of being in the pretext themselves. So we actually impersonated a few of the other execs because we saw that they had friendships outside
Wow.
of the like
Okay.
personal relationships, like outside of work. And
Right.
so we kind of saw conversations that were happening and we kind of piggyback onto those conversations. And so we actually gained access to about, I think it was like two or three of those executive accounts through some targeted phishing, email phishing that we were able to do, and that was all just based on information we found on LinkedIn, and then so you start putting the dots together, and I'd say probably only a couple days of work, to kind of piece those things together and then create those pretexts. It doesn't take a lot, but again, it is based on just a lot of information that's being shared, and a lot of times people just don't realize, and they're not, and I'm not saying like people don't share information on social networks. Like, definitely do that if that's what you want to do, but just be very careful and especially if you may be in a higher profile type position. I mean, I talk to executives all the time that they have to be, you have a different risk profile as soon as you become part of a C
Right.
level,
Yes.
especially in a large multinational organization. I mean, you are naturally going to be targeted by nation states, especially if you're in finance, especially if your company has proprietary maybe information that might be valuable to a foreign adversary. And person will be like, well, I'm just the guy in charge of the accounting department. Like, I'm nobody. Well, that's not true.
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
even if you're nobody, you could be the catalyst for maybe a part of a pretext that actually helps the attacker gain further access. So you may not be the main target, but you may be in the circle of targets, is what I like to tell people.
Yeah, and that's a good point because I think a lot of people say, "Oh, as long as you're not like a famous actor or you're not a politician, that nobody's ever going to target you." But that's not necessarily true.
No.
Your job can elevate you on
Yes.
a threat assessment, just simply because of what you do or what you put on LinkedIn, like you just said. So
Yep.
something for everybody to consider.
It really is. I mean, even the, people doing, I mean, I've seen this before too, of like the accounting clerk or the bank teller or, people that think like, well, I do transactional jobs. Like, who's going to target me? You would be surprised. You actually may be the first target in an organization because of your position, because it may give that leverage or it may be that next step that somebody needs to gain access to that next person in the org.
Right. I think that's how part of how South Carolina a few years ago when Nikki Haley was governor, they had a massive data breach of over 2 million people. Their social security numbers were done. And it was because just like somebody randomly in accounting said, "Hey, I can't get in. I need a password for this,
Yep.
whatever." And the person was like, "Oh, well, that's coming from my friend's, email address. Of course I will help them out." And then, 2 million social security numbers later, you've got a pretty big problem on your hand.
Yep. Yep. You do. Yeah, we see this business email compromise scams. Like you've talked about it, we've all talked about this on the shows, and this is still a persistent problem. I still get messages from people who are like, "This doesn't seem legit." Somebody's my boss is asking me to send him gift cards. What? Like he's never asked for me to send gift cards before,
Yes,
and you're
that's a
like,
big red flag.
yeah, huge red flag. And then so what you do, and I'm glad this person did this, is send a message to their boss and a text said, "Hey, I got this message from you. I'm assuming this isn't you." And they're like, "No, definitely not me." But I see this all the time. And I mean, gift card scams alone is, I know you've covered some
Yeah,
interesting things
that's
on gift card scams.
yeah.
It's crazy right now with that.
Yeah, the government, the police are not gonna ask for you to pay a debt in gift cards from Target.
No,
That's not
definitely
gonna
not. No,
that's not gonna be it.
no.
All right, Tom, so you've painted a very good picture of where we are right now. What do you think the future is of online data collection and social engineering? Hit us with your worst, man.
Yeah. Well, I've mentioned it already. I think we've got a lot to be concerned about with AI and deepfakes. I think that's some of my biggest concerns. I feel very strongly that the government is not doing enough in terms of like a federal privacy law or legislation. It's like not even on the radar, but yet they're too busy banning TikTok when in terms of data collection, it's way more than TikTok. I mean, TikTok is just one very small part of the problem, but you've got Meta, you've got all these giant companies that have really unchecked access unless you're in the state of California where they actually
Right.
have a
Right.
decent privacy law, but that's one state out of the entire country. And I really feel that we have to have something at the federal level, and it can't
Mhm.
just be all this talk right now. But Congress is just not getting anything done for that matter. So I don't have a whole lot of hope, but I think everybody that's in security, I can tell you in cybersecurity, we talk a lot about this, and we really feel that the government needs to do more to help regulate a lot of this technology, and it's just not. And I think, unfortunately, it's going to take a major incident around, you know, the wrong person gets deepfaked, or there's some, massive data breach. It's kind of hard to think of like there's going to be a bigger data breach than what we have seen already, but I feel like that's on the horizon one of these days
Yeah.
if we don't, really take this seriously. And I'm not going to say that the government isn't doing anything. I mean, there's
Right.
great things like CISA's been doing. There's some, great leadership over there, but it's just not nearly enough. And unfortunately, like a lot of times you talk about in your show is, we all have to, defend ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately,
Yeah.
the police, the governments, like they're not going to come save us. And so that's, even in, cybersecurity awareness, we all have to look after ourselves. We have to help educate our friends and our family members as best as we can, and try to protect our information, right? And
Yeah.
always be careful of what you're sharing, who you're sharing that information with, and just be more vigilant about all of your data sharing.
Right. All good stuff, man. I appreciate it. So if anybody wants to know more about you, where can they find you online?
Yeah, the best place is to find me at sharedsecurity.net, which is the Shared Security Podcast. So you can download that wherever you like to listen to podcasts, and we release a new episode every Monday. We've been doing it for 14 years. So if you're looking for some fun banter with my co-hosts, and we talk about the news and we talk about some other things that we find interesting on the security and privacy front. So yeah, give us a listen.
All right, man. I appreciate your time. I appreciate the show that you do. Thank you for trying to do your best to educate as many people as you can about what's going on out there. We definitely need more people like you, man. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Andy. And I appreciate you and everything that you do with your podcast.